I. Discharge. Row 2 of 20. Discharge. Row 1. D. Discharge agreement. Het v. Tattersall. A condition subsequent will discharge the contract. An event that occurs after obligations have begun that will end the contract if this event happens. Row 2. Discharge agreement. The Anna Blumenthal parties can agree to discharge the contract by mutual waiver if they both still have outstanding obligations. Row 3. Discharge agreement. Pinnell's case. If one party has fulfilled their obligations and the other hasn't, but both want to discharge the contract, this can be done by deed or accord and satisfaction. Row 4. Discharge agreement. Brigham Investments v. Carr. An equitable waiver can await a discharge a contract if one party has not fulfilled their obligations but both parties wish to discharge the contract. This is similar to promissory estoppel. Row 5. Discharge performance. Cutter v. Powell. Entire obligations rule. If you have an obligation under a contract, you have not discharged your obligation until you have done everything that was required of you. Row 6. Discharge performance. Sumter v. Hedges. Exception to entire obligations rule. Acceptance of partial performance. One party has completed some of their obligations and the other party is happy with this and so voluntarily part pays the contract for the work completed. Row 7. Discharge performance. Vigers v. Cook. Exception to entire obligations rule. Acceptance of partial performance. One party has completed some of their obligations and the other party is happy with this and so voluntarily part pays the contract for the work completed. Row 8. Discharge performance. Honeck v. Isaacs. Substantial performance. Essentially the contract has been performed minus a few defects. The paying party has to pay the full contract amount. The cost of repair of the defects. Row 9. Discharge performance. Bolton v. Mahadeva. Substantial performance has to be substantial. The overall goal of the contract must have been pretty much performed. Row 10. Discharge performance. Rose and Frank v. Crompton Bros. Divisible obligations. Where there are clearly divisible parts of the contract, the agreement can be divided up and each individual agreement can stand alone. Row 11. Discharge performance. Robson v. Drummond. Performance by a third party. If a third party who is of the same skill and the contract is not for a personal nature, then the third party can complete the obligations on the other party's behalf. Row 12. Discharge performance. British Wagon v. Lee. Performance by a third party. If a third party who is of the same skill and the contract is not for a personal nature, then the third party can complete the obligations on the other party's behalf. Row 13. Discharge breach. Definition or treacle. Where a party without lawful excuse fails or refuses to perform what is due from him under the contract or performs defectively or incapacitates himself from performing. Row 14. Discharge anticipatory breach. Hodgster v. de la Tour. Before the time for performance of contract, one party informs the other they will not fulfill their obligation to perform the contract. In this case there is an immediate right to damages. Row 15. Discharge breach of a condition. Innocent party has the immediate right of election either terminate and claim damages or affirm and claim damages. Row 16. Discharge breach of a warranty. Innocent party can sue for damages only. Row 17. Discharge breach of an innominate term. The innocent party's rights depends on the seriousness of the consequences of the breach. Left parent Hong Kong Fur v. Kawasaki. Right parent. Row 18. Discharge right of election affirmation. Stocznia Gdanska v. Latvian Shipping. Left parent no to right parent. The innocent party is allowed a reasonable time to decide if they want to affirm/repudiate. Row 19. Discharge right of election affirmation. Yukon Line v. Rendsburg Investments. Affirmation must be clear and unequivocal. Row 20. Discharge. Right of election dash affirmation. White and Cater v. McGregor. If the innocent party decides to affirm, then all obligations and rights remain on both sides. Row 21. Discharge. Limitations on affirmation. Hounslow v. Twickenham Garden Development. You must not need the other party's cooperation to carry out your obligations and affirm. Row 22. Discharge. Limitations on affirmation. White and Cater v. MC Gregor. The party who wishes to affirm must have a legitimate interest in affirming. Row 23. Discharge. Limitations on affirmation. The Alaskan Trader. Legitimate interest definition dash if there is no legitimate interest where affirmation is wholly unreasonable. Row 24. Discharge. Limitations on affirmation. The dynamic legitimate interest is only applied in extreme cases where damages would be an adequate remedy and affirmation would be unreasonable. Row 25. Discharge. Limitations on affirmation. Reichman v. Beveridge. Landlords may have a legitimate interest in affirming by allowing the property to stand empty. Row 26. Discharge. Dangers of affirmation. The Simona. The affirming party may be in breach themselves at a later date. If this is the case, the innocent party would then be in breach and they would be sued. Row 27. Discharge. Dangers of affirmation. Avery v. Bowden. A frustrating event may deny a right to damages. Row 28. Discharge. Right of election dash termination. The Santa Clara. Reasonable notice of election to terminate and required. Row 29. Discharge. Right of election dash termination. Howard v. Pickford Tool. For a squith LJ apostrophe an unaccepted repudiation is a thing written water left parent. You must notify other party of termination. Right parent.